elements from the former Communities and Housing Committee, plus regulatory functions, licensing, and resilience or emergency planning. So in addition to those police and fire functions, which used to be with Communities and Housing, and welcome to our guests from Police Scotland, well known to the Chamber. Good to see you back. The first task and only task for me is to call for nominations for chair of the board. I think you all know the rules by now. I can run through them if anybody wants, but I doubt that you do. So can I call for nominations, please, for chair of the Community Safety Board? Councillor Finlay-Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to nominate, I know he's not here in his absence, Councillor George Murray.
Okay, Councillor George Murray. Is there a seconder for that nomination from Councillor Callum McLean?
I'll second it.
Got all the experience under the sun.
Yeah.
Are there any other nominations? No other nominations. Well, in that case, Councillor Murray is elected, subject, of course, to his consent to take on the duties as chair. Given he is not present, I'll obviously stay in the chair until we appoint a vice chair who will take over the chair of the meeting today. So can I have nominations, please, for vice chair of the board? Leader.
Can I nominate Councillor Francis Murray?
Councillor Francis Murray is nominated. Is there a seconder for that nomination? Councillor Finlay-Stewart. Are there any other nominations for Vice Chair of the Community Safety Board? Okay, there being none.
Paul's not a member, we need another proposal.
Sorry, it's been pointed out to me, Leader, you're not a member of the board. So can that...
I'll propose instead of the leader.
Thank you, Councillor McSween. And Councillor Stewart, you've seconded. There being no other nominations in that case, Councillor Francis Murray is elected Vice Chair of the Board, and I invite her to take the chair of the meeting.
You just need to press this button to bring in any speaker.
Thank you very much. I think this system of spotting speakers is going to be the undoing of me, so I hope Councillor Murray, or the other Councillor Murray, will take this on. Item 3 then, declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they have in any items of the agenda. It would be helpful if you are expressing an interest, you declare why in the item concerned. Members in the chamber, please do so by pressing your microphone, or on Teams by using the raise hand function. Actually, we can't see you, so you'd have to say something. Oh, somebody can see, that's fine. And then please ensure that the declaration is repeated prior to the relevant item. So do we have any declarations of interest? Okay, there have been no declarations of interest. We can move on to item 4, which is the Civic Government Licensing Subcommittee, appointment of members. And this is a report from the Chief Executive. This report seeks the appointment of members to the Civic Government Licensing Subcommittee. This subcommittee considers, under delegation, the determination and suspension of licences in terms of the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982. The chair of the Community Safety Board is an ex officio member of the subcommittee, and the board is invited to appoint 6 other members to the subcommittee, at least 2 of whom are members of the Community Safety Board. So I will now call for nominations and seconders, please, for these appointments. And sorry, as the Chief Executive, do you want to speak to this? No. Don't all rush. Finlay, Councillor Stewart.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Malcolm MacDonald.
Is there a seconder? Councillor McLean. We just need another 5.
I nominate the future colleague of the Board of Carl Winuig.
Okay, and have we got a seconder for that nomination? Councillor Susan Thompson. Getting there. Councillor McLean nominates Councillor Finlay Stewart, and that's seconded by Councillor Donald Fraser.
I'll nominate whoever's going to take the second seat down here, down on Barra and Battersea.
Okay, so that's a nomination for the second Barra and Battersea councillor. Do we have a seconder for that? Yep, Councillor Donald Fraser again. Can we have a recap of who we've got? Would that be all right?
Yeah. So far, we have Councillors Malcolm K. MacDonald, Councillor Finlay Stewart, and the newly elected member from Ward 1 and Ward 6. And just to remind, it's gone off again.
Oh, sorry.
Just to remind members, the appointees need not be members of the Community Safety Board. It's from the wider membership of the quorum.
Councillor Finlay Stewart.
Thank you. Nominate Councillor Callum McLean.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Fraser.
I'm the opposition. I'm a licence holder.
So that's Councillor Donald Fraser, seconded by Councillor Malcolm MacDonald. So we now have the membership of the Civic Government Licensing Subcommittee. Thank you very much. Move on now to item number 5, which is the police and fire. And that is the local police area performance against the CNES Local Policing Plan 2020 to 2023. And we have a report by our area commander, Chief Inspector Alistair MacLeod. I'd like to add my welcome to that of the Chief Executive, to Chief Inspector MacLeod, to the meeting. The report is for noting, and it informs members on performance with reference to the objectives outlined in the policing plan. So I would like to ask Chief Inspector MacLeod to take us through the report.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the welcome. Can I just take the opportunity also to introduce Inspector Jane McKenzie, for those that don't know her, who's accompanying me here today. So Jane's my second in command for the Western Isles, so to speak. Okay, so the reports for noting, as Councillor Murray said there, I'm not sure how many here today were on the previous committee, but the report has changed a wee bit in format and content from previous police reports. So it's a work in progress in terms of that. It's there. We're changing it to try and make it more effective and for yourselves to perform the function that you do for the police here in the Western Isles in terms of accountability. So any feedback about the report would be really welcome to myself. So the at a glance section, then, if I go to page 4, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because the report's quite lengthy, so I'm not going to go through it line by line, but I'm going to highlight one or two things and The at a glance section really is what it says. The report focuses on a small number of headline figures, most of which are pretty straightforward, self-explanatory. The thing I wanted to highlight there is, as always, when you're talking about small numbers, percentages can be quite misleading, and so slight changes in numbers can lead to a significant percentage change, and you'll see that there with disqualified driving, which is showing us changing by 50%, but it's actually a change in two offences. So it's just to bear that in mind. I should also point out that the report is based on the most recent available figures published, which are those to the 31st of March 2022. So while we're almost a full quarter on now from that, and we're waiting for the Q1 figures to come out after the end of June, the advantage to that is that we're looking at a full counting year for comparison on last year and the previous years. So the document's based on the local policing priorities as per our policing plan, which runs to 2023, and it's presented as a set of information against each priority. Every section covers the most significant points, but at the back of the report there are tables which contain more detailed breakdowns of crime types, frequency, clear-up rates, and how they compare against last year and the last 3 and 5 year averages. So that's really on the report. If I move on to the first priority there, which is road safety and road crime, and our objective there is set out at the start of the section, and the numbers there again are self-explanatory. These are the numbers that the authors of the report have chosen to highlight. The wider figures around road safety, as I say, are at the back of the document. They've also chosen to show a comparison against the other island authority areas, just for your interest there. So we continue to coordinate local activity on road safety through the multi-agency operational road safety delivery group. Requests for enforcement against speeding continue. It's fair to say to continue to form a large part of the community requests for police activity around road safety. We have to kind of prioritise that quite carefully for obvious reasons. The report talks about Operation CEDAR, which stands for We Love a Mnemonic in the Police, Challenge, Educate, Detect and Reduce. Inspector Mackenzie works with partners on the educate and reduce aspects through things like analysis of collision data and organising our activities around local and national education and enforcement campaigns to raise awareness and detect offenders. In terms of enforcement, local officers supported by the Roads Policing Specialist Department engage in roadside enforcement and education. Roads Policing commit to operational deployments to the Western Isles and the other island areas at least twice a year, over and above the times they're here out of necessity for investigations, etc. So our aim here is to reduce harm, obviously, and the headline figure there is fatalities on the roads network. You can see that the figure is relatively constant over the last 5 years, but we don't take any comfort from that, as obviously one death on the roads is one too many, and our intention is to get that down further. The last time I reported to the council, I spoke about a concerning rise in instances of drink and drug driving, and you can see that that continues, albeit to a lesser extent, to the end of the counting year. So we're seeing a rise from 28 to 49 compared to the previous year. 2021 was probably more than likely affected by lockdown and was lower than the 3 and 5 year averages, but 21-22 was well above those averages. To put a positive spin on that, I suppose the dramatic rise in the early part of the year wasn't continued over the festive period, which was a big concern for me in the lead up to that. But my concern is that there's still an element in the community here for whom drinking and driving remains normal behaviour. I was going to mention briefly about the use of drug wipes by our roads policing colleagues in recent years. this has highlighted how common it is for people to drive whilst under the influence of controlled drugs. We've only got one officer here in the Western Isles trained and equipped in the use of these, but we're working towards expanding this, and I think we're missing an opportunity to further contribute to road safety through the robust enforcement of these laws, because I think that it is widespread, and without the use of that kind of drug wipe technology, we're only catching the most impaired here. Very briefly on speeding, offences are up significantly on last year and the average over recent years. This is disappointing, obviously, but it does serve to evidence the level of enforcement activity being carried out in relation to this priority. So looking at the indicative figures for the first 9 weeks of this year, that's showing that the figures for speeding are probably starting out to be a bit lower than they have been for the last couple of years. That's all I proposed to say on road safety. Chair, do you want me to pause before I move on?
We could take questions now on the roads, if anybody would like to come in. Kenneth McLean, Barra, would you like to come in?
Oh, whoops, sorry, my hand's been up since last time I spoke. Never mind.
Okay. Donald McSween.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the drink and drugs. Are you able to provide any more of a breakdown? Is it rural? Is it, well, I was going to say urban? Is it Stornoway? Is it people coming in and out of Stornoway, or is it just the same levels everywhere?
I don't think, Councillor, I can report on any particular pattern in these terms. I could look at a bit more detailed analysis of that to see if it throws anything up. I don't think there's any of that kind of pattern there, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask myself, you mentioned that a big proportion of what you receive is about this issue, and I'm sure other members would agree with me. I've had a number of representations from people in my own ward about speeding through the town at night, particularly people who live within the town area, and that does seem to be something that is a concern for residents in the town area, and I can only imagine it must be quite difficult for people who live right in the centre of town. I hear it myself on the roads, and it is good to see the amount of activity that there is evidenced by the number of charges that have been brought. Okay, so that's on roads. We'll move on then to your next heading.
Thank you, Chair. The next priority is antisocial behaviour, disorder and violence, including alcohol and drug misuse. So again, the intention and the objective are set out there at the start of the section. I reported last November that what we term common assaults, that is assaults that don't result in a serious injury, were rising year on year, as were assaults on emergency workers. So you can see from the table at the back of the report again that by the end of the counting year, we had 132 common assaults compared to 104 the previous year. The numbers of assaults on emergency workers seemed to kind of level off a wee bit towards the end of the counting year, but the level of kind of non-serious violence continues to be high. And again, concerningly, that rise appears to be continuing into this counting year based on the figures, the indicative figures that aren't yet in the public domain. The analysis that we did last year in relation to the rise in common assaults, there was nothing startling in what came out of it. It was a high proportion of the records we had at markers for alcohol or drugs being involved. The majority were in the Stornoway wards, and the peak times were around late hours on Friday and Saturday nights. So nothing in that would have surprised anybody. We've always prioritised policing of the nighttime economy. for that very reason, and I continue to instruct officers to have a high visibility presence in the town centre of Stornoway at relevant times, and for all officers to engage in proactive inspections of licensed premises across the Western Isles. We look for them to liaise with staff and responsible persons on the premises, and we expect them to record their findings appropriately. So we do record a high number of licensed premises inspections by the police every week in the Western Isles. In terms of the more serious violence, again, you can see the figures there. The serious violence, and obviously this is the other end of common assault, so where there is an injury that's termed as serious, these remain relatively rare, and again, there's no particular pattern to that, and the clear-up rates are pretty good for the serious violence stuff as well. I think the only other thing probably I would note in terms of ASB disorder and violence is recent community concern about antisocial behaviour involving young people in Stornoway, and again, it's a bit kind of Stornoway centric. I do appreciate that, but that's where the volume of this kind of issues happens. Following a really positive, actually, public meeting which some of the councillors attended, that resulted in Stornoway Community Council taking the lead in forming a group which they're calling Safeguarding Stornoway Community Partnership. So Police Scotland will attend this group and support the activities of the group from our own perspective and contribute what we can. From my point of view, I hope it's going to be a really effective way to coordinate the efforts of statutory services along with third sector and the resources that we've got available in the community already in a way which is community-led. So I think that's a really positive development actually, and the first meeting of that group is later this week. So we'll see where that goes.
Okay, do we want to take any questions now on that section of the report? Councillor Fraser?
Yeah, just a generalised question. You mentioned nighttime resourcing for weekends in Stornoway. Will you be able to tell the committee, on average, for example, right now on a Tuesday afternoon, how many police officers are on shift in Stornoway or in Lewis, and how does that contrast to the weekend, say?
I wouldn't normally go into officer numbers in a public forum just for operational reasons, but I'm happy to discuss that privately with members of the board if that's acceptable, Chair.
Yes.
I mean, we've got a shift pattern basically which includes overlaps at peak times of demand. So effectively, during the busy periods on a Friday and Saturday night, there are two shifts on at the same time, so it doubles the numbers that you would see on the likes of just now on a weekday afternoon.
And do you feel you have enough resources for that?
I'd love more.
Okay.
I'd love more. We've kind of numbers.
That point, Councillor Steele, the leader.
Thank you. I suppose a technical question, just the detection rates. How do you work out the detection rates?
They're based on a positive disposal of the case by the police. Okay. So what happens beyond that could be anything from a recorded police warning to a fixed penalty to somebody being cautioned and charged and reported to the fiscal. It doesn't relate to what happens thereafter.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, anybody? If there are no further questions, we'll move on to your next section.
Thank you. So acquisitive crime, almost all forms of acquisitive crime are down year on year in the Western Isles. Frauds, however, are up significantly on 3 and 5 year averages, but down slightly on last year itself. This is a national trend in terms of people falling victim to frauds due to cyber-enabled crime. And again, we've spoken about this before at previous committees. The clear-up rate for these is particularly low, probably due to the lack of opportunity for inquiry and the technology involved. What we concentrate on in relation to that is the preventative work, i.e. trying to raise awareness of the common ways that people can be scammed, and when somebody does fall victim, we seek to identify whether there are any particular vulnerabilities that would mean they're more likely to be targeted again. So it's disappointing to see people falling victim actually to the same modus operandi time and again. But it is a continual piece of work to try and raise awareness, and the Preventions and Interventions Officer uses a variety of methods to reach different audiences. Victims continue to receive that input from the PNI officer, just to try and ensure they don't become repeat victims. The banking protocol is mentioned in the report there, and that's a really positive piece of work, and we see evidence of it working in the Western Isles now and again, where it's proved its value even relatively recently when staff have intervened to prevent possible suspicious transactions when they assess a customer to be vulnerable for a particular reason. I want to also highlight a possible sort of threat on the horizon in terms of the current economic situation and how it relates to acquisitive crime. So when the cost of living is particularly high, incomes are stagnating, inflation is high, and in particular the cost of food and fuel is rising, it's reasonable to anticipate an increase in acquisitive crime over the coming months. We've seen it happen before in the past. This might include shoplifting, thefts of domestic fuel, drive-offs from filling stations without paying for fuel. We've not seen this manifest noticeably yet in the Western Isles, but it's definitely starting to show up in trends in mainland Highland. For example, where rural premises storing high volumes of fuel, such as quarries, have been targeted, and the recent changes in the rules on red diesel have made these places even more attractive targets, actually, as they're now storing road legal fuel. We've already done a bit of work around messaging and communication with these relevant premises in the Western Isles to give them security advice. But just in terms of the potential rise in acquisitive crime, it's something that we're awake to locally and as a division, and preventative work is ongoing to try and reduce the impact of that. It's just to highlight.
Mm-hmm. Any questions on that particular section, on that particular point? If not, I'll ask the Chief Inspector to move on.
Thanks, Chair. Protecting vulnerable people. So, as it says, this is about with partners focusing on safeguarding communities. The domestic crime, I'll highlight the rise in this form of crime. It's not easily explained in as much as we anticipated potentially that there might be an increase in domestic abuse over the course of lockdown, and that's happened here, but it hasn't happened in other command areas in the Highlands and Islands to the same extent, so it's clearly not as simple as that. The higher number is nearer to the longer term average, and it's possible, as I say, that we had an unusually low year during 2021, and then it's bounced back. In terms of what we're doing about that, we're represented on the Violence Against Women Partnership, which has statutory and third sector services on board. A domestic abuse coordinator, I'm not sure if that's the correct title, domestic abuse coordinator has recently been appointed in each of the 3 island areas to assist with that work, basically. And additionally, through MARAC, which is Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conferences, we continue to work with partners to provide a coordinated package of support to the most vulnerable domestic abuse victims. We also continue to proactively target domestic abuse perpetrators with warning letters, bail checks, and in the more serious cases, perpetrator management plans to disrupt their activities. So there's a fair amount of work goes into trying to reduce the impact of domestic abuse. In terms of sexual offences, the figures on the table speak for themselves. Numbers are rising across most offences on last year. Clear-up rates, again, are good in terms of getting cases reported. Although, as I was saying to Councillor Steele, that doesn't always translate to positive results in the court. And we know that there's an issue nationally with that in terms of conviction rates, particularly for rapes. Again, emphasis for the police is on providing a professional and a victim-centred approach to this type of crime. We do recognise the trauma involved in being a victim and also the added stress of choosing to engage with the criminal justice system. So we're continuing to work to improve the experience of victims of sexual crime. There's new Scottish Government guidelines, I'll mention very briefly, on child protection, which we and our partners are working towards implementing over the next 18 months. Some aspects of the proposed changes, whilst positive in principle, are particularly challenging for rural and island areas. A good example of that is the proposed new model for a child interview, which is a piece of work by the government to try and raise and standardise the level of training and experience of officers and social workers who interview children who are victims or witnesses. Training commitments for this are huge, and this is easier to achieve in urban hubs of specialists than it is in our own area, where services need to be more flexible and multidisciplined just by virtue of the nature of our area. And also because the number of incidents that we have to deal with, thankfully, are much lower. I would highlight that there's a national working group assessing the impact of this on rural areas and working towards solutions. Our own Child Protection Committee is leading and overseeing this work locally. And very briefly, from a preventative perspective, I want to highlight, just for noting, the ongoing work jointly between the Child Protection Committee and NSPCC in relation to a year-long campaign to promote the use of NSPCC resources by parents and carers of younger children. The aim is to encourage people to have conversations with children, which will help them develop resilience and make them less vulnerable to being targeted by perpetrators of abuse. We've had training sessions for relevant professionals and more recently for parents and carers, which have been well received. A fair number of the resources that the NSPCC produces for this, for use in home and classroom and the like, have been translated into Gaelic as part of this campaign and will be published on the NSPCC website going forward. And I hope that this will provide a lasting legacy for that campaign for the Western Isles. That's all I was going to propose to say really on protecting vulnerable people. Hate crime there is up as well. Hate crimes are subject to a high degree of scrutiny, both in terms of victim welfare, but also just in making sure that we're getting offenders arrested or charged and reported, and we're in a position to identify a trend or a cluster is forming in relation to a particular type of hate crime. Evidence from research previously, and this is wider than just the Western Isles, but including our own user satisfaction surveys for people who've reported things to police over the years, indicate that hate crime is underreported because of a lack of confidence in the police or the wider criminal justice system from underrepresented minority groups. So I do take a degree of comfort in the fact that hate crimes are being reported, but it's part of my responsibility on an ongoing basis to make sure that people have the confidence, whatever their background, to report these things to the police. That's all I'll say on that.
Any questions on that section, anybody? If there are no questions, anybody online? No, we'll move on.
Thank you. Serious and organised crime. So the objective here is a key part of the role of the preventions and interventions officer who I mentioned earlier. The prevention part locally partly involves engagement with young people, for example, through specially designed inputs to schools and youth groups to highlight consequences of being drawn into a life of crime. That's something that's been rolled out across the whole division and the whole country, actually. The early intervention part is done on a partnership basis, and from a police perspective, it's coordinated by a divisional youth offending officer we have, who identifies young people needing that intervention and directs local police activity. So that obviously links in quite closely with what we were saying about antisocial behaviour. The reason it falls under organised crime is really because on a wider basis that kind of early intervention is designed to try and prevent children from being drawn into being exploited by organised crime groups, which thankfully isn't a huge issue in the Western Isles as it stands. Divisionally, the strategy involves targeting particular organised crime groups. The majority of that kind of divisional and national resource indeed for the Highlands is directed at the Moray Firth Basin. And I don't fall out with that because that's the area that's most affected by the kind of serious organised crime and the county lines type activity that we see publicised regularly. The Western Isles is already, in my view, a hostile environment for that type of crime. So what we see most commonly when people are falling victim to organised crime here is either the cybercrime frauds and extortions that we mentioned already, and the supply of drugs. So drug supply offences are up slightly the last couple of years on the longer term averages. Numbers aren't high as you would probably expect, but there is a good level of activity at the moment in relation to the flow of intelligence on the supply of drugs and enforcement activity. And again, in relation to the last part of the objective, which is to do with folk who are substance dependent being directed towards recovery, we've now got a local operating procedure for adult mental health and police custody, between custody, an agreement between custody and the community mental health team, which includes a formal referral process for people who come into police custody who might benefit from access to addiction services. So there's a pathway there straight from police custody to the support that they might need, which is a positive development obviously as well.
Any questions? Anybody on that last section? Anybody online or anybody in the chamber? If not, I would like to thank Chief Inspector MacLeod and Inspector Mackenzie for their attendance and for presenting the report, and look forward to working very closely with them on some of these issues that you have brought up. Thank you. Moving on to item 6. Item 6 has been withdrawn. That's the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service performance against the Fire and Rescue Plan, and will be presented instead to the next meeting of the board. Item number 7, consumer protection and environmental health. Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Fraser. I'm going to call on Colin Fraser, the Consumer and Environmental Services Manager, to speak to the report. And the report seeks out approval for the Consumer and Environmental Services Plan for 2022-23. Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. This is kind of an annual report which we bring up every year. It's for the service plan for the various services from environmental health, trading standards, animal health and various licensing functions. The reported Appendix 1 details the kind of service plan for 22-23, and it covers the various aspects of the service along with kind of the various functions that it carries out. So I'm happy to take any questions anyone has on that. And Appendix 2 just has the year-end review of 21-22 of what we did last year and kind of the activities the services carried out. Last year and the year before were obviously slightly different from previous years given the pandemic, but it's we're getting back onto track with kind of doing the routine activities of the service. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions, anybody, either in the chamber or online? No, in that case, thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. And do members agree the recommendation at 3.1 that we approve the plan for 2022-23? Okay, very good. So that recommendation is agreed. We move on now to item number 8, performance management. That is the 2021-22 Q4 year end. Consumer and environmental services, housing services, municipal services and energy. And we have a report by the Director for Communities providing an overview of the Communities Directorate business plan progress and related performance for the Q4. The area of relevance to this board is the Consumer and Environmental Service at paragraph 6.1 to 6.5 of the report. And we have the Director, Calmian McKeever, who will speak to the report and answer any questions. So over to you, Mr. McKeever.
Thank you, Chair. As you suggested, the service area relevant to the board is Consumer and Environmental Services. The focus on the service, as Colm suggested previously, over the past period has been around the COVID pandemic and ensuring the appropriate safeguards were in place. In that regard, the service carried out over the past year 390 business interventions. The food inspection programme restarted in September, and since then the service has carried out 220 food inspections and issued 111 export health certificates. The service also dealt with 900 general environmental service requests. And the other main area of work over the past period has been preparation for the introduction of short-term lets licensing, which is a substantive agenda item later on. It's also obviously Q4 and year-end and financial performance is outlined at 9.1. I'm happy to report that the service outturned at £63,000 under their budget. So a very busy year for the service. Service met all its service agreed service plan targets, as Colm reviewed in the previous agenda item. So a very good year, I think, for the service. Happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions from anybody either in the chamber here or online? If not, we're at, oh, sorry.
How is it currently resourced to deal with that in the immediate term? For example.
Yeah, we're just using existing resources to facilitate the kind of setting up of the scheme. So we have had, we have got kind of utilised some kind of previous short-term funding to help facilitate a post with it.
And has that applied new pressures into the existing services you provide?
Yes, it is. Like it is another body of work which again we found out about in March this year that we had to kind of introduce for the 1st of October. So that is quite a hill to climb.
And is the Scottish Government providing you with funding for this?
So, no, the scheme is meant to be self-funding. So including any expenditure this year, which is anticipated to be made from the licensing fees, because the scheme opens on the 1st of October and everyone has to be licensed from the 1st of April 2023. So any income should come in before the end of the financial year.
So they haven't given you any initial setup budget to help you get things up and running?
No additional funding.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other points? If not, we're asked, insofar as this board's interests are concerned, do we agree recommendation 3.1? I'll take silence as agreement. Moving on then to item number 9. This is the Local Government Benchmarking Framework Results 2020-21 Communities Department, and we have a report by the Director for Communities. This report informs us of the Local Government Benchmarking Framework 2020-2021 results for the Communities Department and seeks approval of the priority areas chosen for service improvement. The service area, again of relevance to the board, is consumer environmental services, and that's detailed at Appendix 1 of the report. So I'll ask the Director to speak to the report and answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, consumer and environmental services is the service in scope here. The service had 2 performance indicators, and these are outlined at Appendix 1. The priority indicator for service improvement is year-on-year reductions in the overall cost of environmental and trading services per 1,000 of population. The table at page 1 of Appendix 1 shows that the service achieved a 3.85 reduction in costs over the last 2 data points, and an 18% reduction in costs from the base year to the most recent year. So I think that demonstrates, quite significant downward pressure on costs, and it is proposed to maintain that focus on that particular indicator over the course of this present year. Happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions, anybody? Anybody online? No. In that case, insofar as the board's interests are concerned, do members agree recommendation 3.1? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you. We move on now to item 10, civic government licensing. And this relates to the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982, the licensing of short-term lets update. And we have a report by the Director for Communities. This report provides an update on the licensing of short-term lets and seeks approval for the basic framework of the proposed licensing scheme, which all local authorities are required to have in place by October this year, as we've already heard. A report introducing the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982 licensing of short-term lets Order 2022, approved on 19th of January 2022, was approved at the March series, giving delegation to the Director of Communities. Excuse me. Colm Fraser will speak to this report and answer any questions. Mr. Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. So again, it is a report kind of giving an outline of the kind of proposed way ahead for the licensing scheme. There is relatively little leeway for the COLA to implement the scheme. It is a mandatory scheme with a number of mandatory conditions which all local authorities have to implement. So there are several items which the council had scope for taking slightly differently, and as part of the to get a feel for how to take it forward, we did a consultation throughout the West Isles last month. There were about 230 responses, and a summary of that is in Appendix 1, and we've used some of the information in there to help put the direction of travel that we have for the scheme. So the proposal is to keep it a relatively light touch scheme. Obviously we'll apply the mandatory conditions. We're looking at possibly 1 or 2 additional conditions to do with safety, and probably limit at that. Again, it's proposed to have a 3-year licence scheme, which is in line with the Scottish Government guidance, and at paragraph 7.7 is the proposed licence fees for the different types of short-term lets. There is a lower fee for home sharing establishments like bed and breakfasts compared to the self-catering properties, with the lowest fee being 200 and the highest fee being 400 for 3 years. Now, the reason they're different is, again, in the guidance, there is properties with owner-occupiers are anticipated to have less troubles or less problems, so that's why there is anticipated less activity with these. So, again, the information's in the report. I'm happy to take any questions, and just if anyone's got any comments on the direction of travel, if they're happy with it.
Can I ask any contributions from anybody? Councillor Malcolm MacDonald.
Just to ask, how do these fees equate to other authorities such as Orkney and Shetland, or the Highland region?
Unfortunately, we're well, fortunately or unfortunately, we're one of the first ones to kind of publish the fees. So I think Highland Council yesterday had found they're talking between £300 and £600 for their fees. Some of the discussions from mainland local authorities have talked significantly higher than that. It depends on the level of inspection for the premises. We're anticipating a light touch with inspecting a random percentage of premises, but some local authorities may want to inspect every premises, so they could be charging, figures are talking to thousands of pounds.
Any further contributions, anybody here or online? If not, can we, as far as this board's interests are concerned, agree the recommendation at 3.1? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. And that moves us on to item 11, which is taxi licensing review of fares. And this report has been prepared by the Chief Executive. The report is to review the current level of fares for taxi and private car hire licensing where appropriate in the Western Isles. And Ian Smith, Licensing Officer, is going to speak to the report and answer any questions. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Yes, this is a periodic review of the current level of fares for taxi and private hire licensing in the Western Isles. All of the operators were written to regarding this review in March 2022, and after consultation, there were 8 responses and the majority wanted a fare rates increase. In looking at the fuel price reports in Scotland, the comparison I had was from April 2020 to April 2022. Unleaded increased 49% and diesel increased 54%. And as we all know, that's increasing, seems to be day on day or week on week, so it's going higher and higher. This board, we're looking to decide whether to keep the current scale of maximum fares unchanged or agree to an increase. And after the board's decision on whether to keep the fares the same or increase the fares, all taxi and private hire operators will have another opportunity to make representations to the Comhairle on the fares, and that is via an advert we're putting out to the Gazette and online.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to come in there? Any questions for Mr. Smith?
So one more thing, I was just going to say the table in, I think it was appendix number 3, that's what we're using as a template for an increase, but we might tweak that, but that's basically, and we're looking to increase it because obviously I'm getting a lot of operators phoning me every day about the prices, the price of fuel.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it probably should be increased, with the price of fuel and everything, the prices of running the vehicles and everything else is, and maintaining them is increasing all the time. So I think it would be right to increase the fare.
Yeah.
Any other contributions from anybody? If not, then members are asked to determine, in light of these initial consultation responses which you referred to, whether we propose to amend the existing level of fares in terms of Section 17 of the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982, and if so, to determine the proposed fares, or to reaffirm the current scale of maximum fares as previously agreed by the Comhairle, with implementation likely in early August 2022. So we have an either or there, don't we? To determine the proposed fares or to reaffirm the current scale of maximum fares.
Well, basically, we're all happy with an increase. Yeah.
Can I just clarify? There appears to be three options here.
Well, it wasn't really. That was what I should have said. That was what the operators put in as their proposals. We were saying look at option 3. That looks a kind of realistic one. It increases it, but we're using that one as the template for a proposal we're going to put out to put out via advert, and then, like I say, the operators have the opportunity. If they're all happy, it'll basically go ahead. But if there's any representations, it'll go back to the Community Safety Board in September.
So you're basically proposing to increase the fares and the level delegated to essentially the chief executive?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just for the purpose of the minute. Thank you.
Okay. And can I hear if we agree with that, everybody? That's agreed unanimously. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And that represents the business we have on the agenda. Please forgive my halting chairing of that. It was quite detailed and a wee bit unexpected, but there you are. But you get good treatment with the water bottle when you're sitting up in this chair. I realise that now. Councillor George Murray can